Sophia Caldwell had settled into an uncomfortable routine at Redwood Care Facility. It had been 3 months since she had taken on the role of caring for Gabriel Blackwell, the once feared CEO whose name had once been synonymous with power and influence. Now, he lay motionless in a bed, tethered to an array of machines that sustained him. His piercing blue eyes were always open but unseeing, his body a lifeless shell that had been reduced to nothing more than a medical case. Despite his fame, his condition rendered him little more than a name to most, just another patient among many. Sophia had entered the facility with a sense of purpose, excited to contribute to the world of healthcare, to make a difference in someone's life. But over time, that initial excitement had been replaced with an undeniable sense of routine and disillusionment. The days blended together in a haze of monitoring vitals, adjusting medication schedules, and performing endless rounds of physical therapy. Gabriel's condition never seemed to improve, and each day felt like she was merely going through the motions, caring for a man who could not respond, as if he were already lost to the world. Still, Sophia tried to maintain her professionalism, speaking to him with a soft, encouraging tone as she went about her duties. She would often talk about his past, about his companies, his charities, his public image, the things that made Gabriel Blackwell a household name. She spoke as though he could hear her, even though she doubted it. His eyes would sometimes shift ever so slightly when she spoke, but there was no indication he truly understood. She told herself it was just a reflex, a trick of the light. But that morning, as she approached his room for another routine check, she noticed something odd. Gabriel's face, normally expressionless, seemed different. The subtle change was almost imperceptible, but it tugged at her attention. His head, which had always been tilted at an awkward angle, was now turned ever so slightly toward the window. It wasn't a dramatic movement, but it was enough to make her pause. Sophia stood there, her hand on the doorknob, trying to convince herself it was nothing. A slight shift, the way his body had settled or the pillow was arranged. Yet deep down she felt a strange pull, a nagging instinct that told her this was different. She entered the room, brushing away the feeling as she went through the usual checks. Gabriel's chest rose and fell with each mechanical breath, and the heart monitor beeped in its steady, monotonous rhythm. She adjusted the 4-drip, checked his pulse and glanced at the readouts. Everything was as it should be. But as she moved to the other side of the bed, she noticed it. A single tear, glistening in the light, slowly rolled down Gabriel's cheek. The sight froze her in place. Her heart skipped a beat, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. Could it be possible? Was this a sign? Her mind raced as she stood there, staring at the tear, unsure whether she had truly seen it or if it was a figment of her imagination. She quickly wiped it away, shaking her head. It couldn't be. It had to be some sort of reflex, a random spasm of the body. Gabriel Blackwell had been in this state for nearly a year, and there had been no sign of consciousness. But that tear, it lingered in her mind as she continued her tasks. Sophia's thoughts were interrupted by a sound, a low, dull thud coming from Gabriel's room. She froze, heart pounding in her chest. She glanced toward the door, half expecting someone to walk in, but there was no one. The facility was quiet, as it always was at this hour. The thud echoed again, faint but unmistakable. She couldn't ignore it. The logical part of her mind told her it was nothing, but another part of her, something deeper, was telling her to investigate. She stepped closer to the bed, peering down at Gabriel. His breathing was steady, his eyes vacant as always. Yet, just as she was about to turn away, she heard something else. A faint whisper, barely audible, but it was there. "Help me." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. Was she hearing things? Was it just the wind? Or some other strange noise? She couldn't be sure. But the whisper, however soft and distant, felt real. She had to act. Without thinking, she rushed to the door and called out to Jack, an older nurse who had worked at Redwood for years. He would know what to make of this. "Jack, come quick," she said, her voice trembling. "Something's wrong." When Jack arrived, he followed Sophia into Gabriel's room. Everything seemed as it should. The machines hummed, the room was quiet. Jack raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. "It's all good," he said, checking Gabriel's vitals. "You're probably just tired, Sophia. It's a long shift. You're hearing things." But Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As Jack moved to adjust the monitor, she noticed it again. Gabriel's fingers twitched. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Her mind was racing now, her thoughts wild. Had Gabriel just moved? No. It was impossible. He couldn't be aware. The doctors had told her that much. But the evidence was starting to pile up. The tear, the whisper, the twitching fingers. How could she explain it away? Sophia spent the rest of her shift in a haze of doubt and confusion. She couldn't stop thinking about the events that had transpired in Gabriel's room. The tear. The whisper. The movement. She had seen it all, felt it, yet there was no logical explanation for any of it. The next morning, as the sun rose over the facility, Sophia returned to her duties. Her exhaustion from the previous night's events was starting to catch up with her, but she pushed it aside. She couldn't afford to be distracted. She had a job to do. As she walked into Gabriel's room, she noticed something that made her stop in her tracks. Gabriel's head, which had been resting at an odd angle the day before, was now tilted slightly toward the window. Not much, just a slight shift in direction, but it was enough to unsettle her. It was as if he were looking at something. Her breath hitched, and for a moment she stood frozen in the doorway. Could it be? Was he aware? Sophia approached the bed cautiously, her heart hammering in her chest. She reached out and gently adjusted Gabriel's head, guiding it back into its usual position. But just as her fingers brushed his skin, she noticed something else, something that caused her stomach to lurch. A single tear had formed at the corner of his eye, slowly sliding down his cheek. She stared at it for a moment, her mind spinning. She hadn't imagined it. This was real. But what did it mean? Could Gabriel actually be aware of his surroundings? Just then, another faint noise broke the silence. A soft, wet sound like the rustle of fabric or the shuffle of feet. Sophia's heart raced, and she quickly turned her head toward the source. There was nothing. The room was still. She took a deep breath and forced herself to stay calm. Maybe she was overthinking things. She could feel the weight of doubt pressing on her shoulders, but she couldn't ignore what she had seen. She couldn't explain it away. As she continued her routine, checking his vitals and adjusting the machines, she heard it again. A slight rustling noise followed by a soft gasp. It came from Gabriel's throat. Sophia froze. Her mind raced. What was happening? Was he trying to speak? Before she could process the thought, a sudden thud echoed from the hallway, followed by hurried footsteps. Someone was approaching. Sophia quickly composed herself, trying to appear calm. She wiped the tear from Gabriel's cheek and pretended nothing had happened. Jack appeared in the doorway, looking concerned. "You okay, Sophia? You look pale." She forced a smile. "I'm fine. Just a little tired." She glanced at Gabriel. His eyes remained unblinking, his body still. Jack didn't press further, but Sophia could see the skepticism in his eyes. "All right, well, let's get you some coffee. You'll feel better." Sophia nodded, but as she stepped away from Gabriel's bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. Something deep within him was stirring. Sophia's mind spun as she walked out of Gabriel's room, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had witnessed. The tear. The subtle movements. The whispered words. She couldn't shake the feeling that Gabriel was somehow trying to communicate, trying to reach her. But how could it be? The doctors had assured her time and time again that Gabriel's condition was irreversible. Persistent vegetative state, they'd called it. No awareness, no hope for recovery. How could the doctors, who had dedicated their lives to studying the human mind and body, be wrong? Yet everything in her gut screamed that something was terribly wrong, that there was more to Gabriel's condition than anyone realized. The next day, as the sun began to sink low in the sky, Sophia found herself standing in front of Dr. Turner's office, anxiety coiling in her chest. She had to report what had happened. She had to share what she'd seen. If Gabriel was aware, he needed help. But would anyone believe her? Or would they dismiss her like so many others had? Taking a deep breath, she knocked on the door and entered when she heard his muffled response. Dr. Turner, a middle-aged man with a sharp, clinical demeanor, was sitting at his desk, flipping through some paperwork. He looked up when she walked in, his expression neutral. "Ah, Nurse Caldwell," he said, his voice calm but cold. "What brings you here?" I need to speak with you about Gabriel Blackwell." Sophia said, trying to steady her voice. There's something strange happening with his condition. I think he might be aware. Dr. Turner's expression didn't change. He set his papers aside and leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. You've been working long shifts, Sophia. You're probably just tired. You know how the mind can play tricks on you. No, it's not like that, she insisted, her voice rising slightly in frustration. I've seen things, movements, tears, even a whisper. I don't think I'm imagining it. He raised an eyebrow. Whisper. Sophia, are you sure you're not just overreacting? We've been monitoring him closely. His vitals are stable, and his brain scans show no change. His condition hasn't improved in months. What you're describing, subtle movements, a tear, it could all be explained away by involuntary reflexes. A patient in a persistent vegetative state doesn't suddenly start interacting. His brain simply isn't capable of it. Sophia felt a sharp pang of doubt settle in her stomach. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in his expertise. But every fiber of her being screamed that something wasn't right. But I saw it, Dr. Turner. I heard him whisper. I felt his fingers twitch. It's like he's trying to reach out, like he's trapped in there. Dr. Turner sighed, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. I understand your concern, Sophia, but you need to let go of these ideas. Gabriel Blackwell is a case we've studied extensively. There is no miracle cure here. There's nothing more to be done. I suggest you focus on your duties and try not to let these fantasies distract you. You're a good nurse, but you're letting your emotions get the best of you. The words hit her like a slap. She stood frozen, trying to process what he had just said. He wasn't taking her seriously. He wasn't even willing to entertain the possibility that Gabriel might be conscious. He was just dismissing her, just like everyone else. The doubt crept in, but Sophia couldn't shake the images that haunted her. Gabriel's tear-streaked face, his faint movements. The whisper. She left Dr. Turner's office, her resolve shaken but not broken. He might not believe her, but she knew what she had seen. There had to be an answer, and she was determined to find it, no matter how many doors were closed in her face. Later that night, when everyone else had left the facility, Sophia returned to Gabriel's room. She needed to check on him to see if any of the strange events from the past few days had happened again. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. He looked so still, so lifeless, and yet, there it was again. The faintest twitch of his finger. Sophia's heart stopped. She rushed to his side, her hands trembling. She held his wrist, hoping, praying that it was more than just a reflex. She waited, but nothing happened. For a moment, she was sure she had imagined it. Then, as she looked down at him, something even stranger occurred. His eyes, which had always been wide open and unblinking, seemed to focus. Just for a moment. Like he was looking at her. She felt it deep in her gut. He was aware. But how could she prove it? Suddenly, a voice behind her broke her concentration. What are you doing here? Sophia spun around to see Jack standing in the doorway, his face drawn with concern. Jack, she stammered, unsure how to explain what she had seen, what she was feeling. Jack stepped into the room, shaking his head. Sophia, you need to let this go. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've seen my fair share of cases like Gabriel's. He's not coming back. You can't keep looking for signs where there aren't any. Her breath quickened. But Jack, you don't understand. Before she could say more, a faint sound interrupted them. It was a soft, almost inaudible gasp. Then Gabriel's lips parted slightly, and he whispered, so softly that Sophia could barely hear it. Help me. Sophia's heart slammed in her chest. She was sure of it now. This wasn't a trick of the mind. Gabriel was trying to speak, trying to ask for help. But Jack wasn't convinced. You're imagining it, he said gently, stepping closer to the bed. You need to get some rest. Sophia couldn't argue with him. She didn't know how to make him understand. She simply nodded, her heart heavy with the knowledge that no one would believe her. Not yet. The days after the incident with Jack blurred together. Sophia's exhaustion was growing. But the need to uncover the truth about Gabriel's condition had consumed her every waking moment. She couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was happening at Redwood Care Facility. She had seen enough to know that Gabriel was aware, and yet no one was willing to believe it. One night, after a particularly grueling shift, Sophia returned to Gabriel's room, determined to get to the bottom of his condition. She had to know if he could hear her, if he could understand. Maybe, just maybe, he could communicate with her somehow. As she adjusted the machines at his bedside, she leaned in close to his ear, speaking softly. Gabriel, I'm here. I'm not going to leave you. I'll find a way to help you, I promise. For a moment there was silence. She stared at his face, waiting, hoping for some kind of response. Then she heard it. A faint, raspy whisper that seemed to come from the very depths of his chest. Don't trust them. The words hit her like a lightning bolt. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. She looked at Gabriel's face, but his eyes remained as lifeless as ever. Had she imagined it? Had she misheard? She leaned closer, her voice trembling. Who do I not trust? Before she could ask anything more, the door to the room opened, and Dr. Turner walked in, his expression unreadable. Sophia quickly pulled back, her heart pounding in her chest. What's going on in here, Nurse Caldwell? Dr. Turner's voice was cold, almost accusatory. I told you to focus on your duties, not to entertain fantasies. I was just checking on him, Sophia said quickly, trying to compose herself. Just a routine check. Dr. Turner's gaze lingered on her, his eyes sharp and calculating. Make sure you stay on task. We don't need any distractions here. His words stung, but Sophia could feel something much darker lurking beneath his calm exterior. There was something about him, something that didn't sit right. The way he dismissed her so easily, the way he acted as if Gabriel was just another patient to be managed, not a human being with a mind of his own. As he turned to leave, he glanced back at her one last time. Make sure you're taking care of yourself, Nurse Caldwell. We can't have you getting too attached. Sophia stood there, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She had always trusted the medical professionals she worked with, but now something about Dr. Turner seemed off. The warning Gabriel had given her, "Don't trust them," echoed in her mind. What was really going on at Redwood Care Facility? And why had Gabriel tried to warn her? With renewed determination, she decided to investigate further. There were too many unanswered questions, and she wasn't going to stop until she had answers. Sophia couldn't shake the weight of Gabriel's warning. She had heard his voice so clearly, and the chill it sent down her spine still lingered. Don't trust them. Who was he talking about? Was he warning her about Dr. Turner? Or was it someone else at the facility? Could there be a conspiracy hidden behind the pristine walls of Redwood Care? Determined to uncover the truth, she knew she needed to investigate further. But where to start? She couldn't simply walk into Dr. Turner's office and demand answers. He'd dismiss her again, just as he had done before, with that same patronizing tone. That's when Sophia thought of Jack. Though he had been skeptical of her claims, he was a reliable source. An older nurse, Jack had worked at Redwood Care longer than anyone else. If anyone knew the hidden truths about the facility, it would be him. But there was a risk in confiding in him. If he didn't believe her or thought she was overreacting, she'd lose her only ally. Still, she had no choice. She needed answers. The next day, after her shift, Sophia found Jack in the break room, sitting at a table and sipping his coffee. The lines on his face were deeper than she remembered, and his eyes seemed tired, distant. She wondered how much longer he could keep up this gruff exterior. Jack, she said quietly, sitting down across from him. I need your help. He looked up, clearly surprised by her sudden appearance. He sighed, setting his coffee cup down. Sophia, what's this about? I thought we were past the part where you're seeing things. You need to stop this before you burn yourself out. I'm not imagining it, she said, her voice firm. I know you think I'm overreacting, but I swear, something is wrong with Gabriel. And with the facility. I don't trust Dr. Turner. Or anyone here. I need you to help me find out what's really going on. Jack's expression softened for a moment, then hardened again. Sophia, you don't know what you're asking for. This is not a game. If you dig too deep, you might not like what you find. There are things about this place, things about Gabriel's case, that you're better off not knowing. Sophia felt a shiver run down her spine. What did Jack mean by that? What kind of secrets was he keeping? I need to know, Jack. I need to know if I'm right about this. I won't back down until I do. He studied her for a moment, his gaze intense. Finally, he nodded slowly. All right. I'll help you, but you need to promise me something. If things get dangerous, if we uncover something we can't handle, you walk away. No heroics. Do you understand? Sophia hesitated for only a second before nodding. I understand. But I won't stop until I know the truth. Later that night, after the other nurses had left for their shifts, Jack met Sophia at the archives in the basement of the facility. The room was small, cluttered with dusty files and old medical records, many of which were years out of date. As the overhead light flickered, Jack began sifting through the files on the shelves, pulling out old reports and accident logs. Sophia hovered nearby, trying to suppress the anxiety gnawing at her. There had to be something here, something that connected Gabriel's condition to whatever hidden agenda was playing out behind the scenes at Redwood Care. Minutes stretched into hours. They worked in silence, the only sound being the rustling of papers. Finally, Jack pulled out a folder that made his hands shake. Here, he said in a low voice, his face pale. This is what I've been looking for. Sophia took the folder from him and opened it carefully. The first page was a detailed report on Gabriel Blackwell's accident, something that didn't sit right with her. The crash had been ruled an accident, but there were inconsistencies. The weather had been clear the night Gabriel's car swerved off the road. And why was he alone in the car? Where were his security personnel, his staff, his bodyguards? As she flipped through the pages, the evidence only grew murkier. There was mention of an experimental drug, a new treatment designed to enhance brain function, and something about a botched clinical trial. Sophia felt the blood drain from her face. No, this couldn't be true. Was it possible that Gabriel hadn't just been in a car accident? Had he been deliberately put in danger? Jack, what is this? She whispered, her voice trembling. What's going on here? Jack's face was grim. This is what I was afraid of. They've been keeping him sedated for months, controlling his mind, trying to suppress his recovery. They've been running tests on him, using him as a guinea pig. And no one outside this facility knows about it. Sophia's world seemed to tilt on its axis. She had suspected something was off, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. Gabriel Blackwell, the CEO, the man who was supposed to be one of the most powerful people in the world, had been reduced to a prisoner in a hospital bed. And for what? To test some experimental drug? To keep him under control? Why? Why would they do this? Sophia asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jack looked at her, his eyes filled with regret. It's about money, Sophia. And power. Gabriel Blackwell was more than just a businessman, he was a force. A threat to a lot of people. Some of those people are in positions of power in this facility. They didn't want him to recover. They wanted to keep him under their thumb. And now they're using him as leverage, experimenting on him. All while the rest of the world thinks he's just another vegetable in a bed. Sophia's mind reeled. She had been working in this place, caring for Gabriel, and she hadn't known any of this. She felt sick. Betrayed. But the anger rose quickly, burning away the fear. Someone had to pay for this. We have to stop them, Sophia said, her voice fierce. We have to get this information to the outside world, to someone who will make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Jack nodded grimly. We can't go to the authorities, they'll cover it up. But I know someone. A journalist. He'll know what to do with this. We need to move quickly. The next day, the air seemed heavier. The weight of their discovery pressing down on Sophia like a constant, suffocating reminder of how far-reaching the corruption at Redwood Care went. She had barely slept, her mind spinning with thoughts of Gabriel and the dark secrets that surrounded him. What kind of person would do something like this? How could someone use another human being as a pawn in their twisted game? Sophia met Jack in the archives again that night, her heart racing as she approached the basement door. This time they weren't just looking for information, they were preparing to act. They had to move quickly. Jack had made contact with the journalist, but they needed to secure the evidence. The flash drive, the one containing all of the records Jack had uncovered, was the key to everything. Could expose the conspiracy. It could bring down Redwood Care once and for all. As they entered the basement, Jack seemed unusually tense, glancing around nervously as if he expected someone to jump out at him. Sophia felt her stomach knot with unease. Something was wrong. I'll grab the drive, Jack said quietly, heading for the back of the room. You stay here and keep watch. Sophia nodded, but her unease only deepened as she watched Jack fumble with the filing cabinet. There was something about the way he was acting that didn't sit right. Her instincts were screaming at her to leave, but she couldn't. Not now. Suddenly, a crash broke the stillness of the room. Sophia's heart leaped in her chest, and she rushed toward Jack. When she reached him, she froze. The entire room had been ransacked. Papers were strewn everywhere, the filing cabinets overturned, the shelves emptied. Jack was slumped against the wall, his face pale and his breathing shallow. Jack! Sophia cried, rushing to his side. What happened? He groaned, his hand reaching out weakly toward her. It's too late. They found out. They know. You have to go. Take the drive. It's on the desk. Under the papers. Get out of here now. Sophia's hand shook as she grabbed the flash drive from the desk, her mind racing with the horrible implications. Who had done this? Who had attacked Jack? Just as she turned to run, the door to the basement flew open. Sophia's breath caught in her throat as a group of guards flooded the room. She ducked behind a shelf, heart hammering in her chest. Jack's eyes fluttered closed, and the blood on the floor told her he wouldn't last much longer. With the flash drive in hand, Sophia made her decision. She ran, her feet pounding against the floor as she headed for the nearest exit. But she wasn't alone. The guards were coming. Sophia's heart raced as she darted down the dark hallway, the sound of footsteps pounding against the floor growing louder behind her. The flash drive, her only evidence of the conspiracy, was clutched tightly in her hand, a small piece of salvation in a world that had suddenly gone dark. Every step felt like it could be her last, every breath ragged as she pushed forward, the terror of being caught inching closer with every passing second. She reached the staff exit, the cold metal door in front of her just a few feet away. She could see the faint glimmer of moonlight filtering through the cracks, a fleeting moment of freedom. With one final burst of energy, she shoved the door open and stepped outside, her eyes squinting against the bright, artificial light of the security cameras. But the cold night air was a welcome relief, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to take a deep breath. She had made it out. But that relief was short-lived. Stop! The shout came from behind her, sharp and commanding. It was Dr. Turner. He had been the one orchestrating the whole twisted operation. He knew she had found the evidence. He knew she had discovered his lies. Sophia spun around, the cold steel of the flash drive still clutched tightly in her palm. Dr. Turner was flanked by two of his security guards, both of them towering and menacing. They had been waiting for this moment, no doubt. They had been planning her capture for days, maybe longer. The realization made Sophia's stomach churn. She had thought she had outsmarted them. But in truth, they had been one step ahead of her the entire time. Dr. Turner's gaze was cold, calculating. There was no remorse in his eyes, only a chilling sense of control. You've been very clever, Sophia, he said, his voice smooth and menacing. But this is where it ends. Hand over the flash drive, and we can avoid any further complications. Sophia's blood ran cold, but she knew there was no turning back now. She wasn't going to give up. Not after everything she had seen, not after what had happened to Jack. If she handed over the drive, they would bury it. Everything she had fought for, the truth, Gabriel's life, would be erased in an instant. I won't give it to you, she said, her voice trembling but firm. You can't stop me. You've already done enough damage. People will find out the truth. It's over. Dr. Turner's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a sneer. You think you can make a difference? You're just a nurse, Sophia. You don't know how powerful I am. How powerful we are. You have no idea who you're up against. Sophia's grip tightened on the flash drive. He was right about one thing. She didn't know everything. But she knew enough to understand that this wasn't just about her. It was about Gabriel. It was about all the lives that had been ruined by the conspiracy Dr. Turner and his associates had orchestrated. She had to make sure the truth came out no matter the cost. You're wrong, she said, meeting his gaze with defiance. I'm not just a nurse. I'm the one who's going to stop you. And you can't stop me. Dr. Turner's smile faltered for just a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. We'll see about that. he said, his tone icy. He nodded to his guards, and in that instant Sophia knew they were going to make sure she wouldn't leave here alive. She had underestimated him. She had thought she could outwit him, but now she realized that Dr. Turner had no intention of letting her go. But as the guards advanced toward her, Sophia's mind raced. There had to be a way out of this. There had to be something she could do. Suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted by a voice. It was low, barely a whisper, but it sent a jolt of recognition through her. "Run!" It was Gabriel's voice. Sophia froze, her pulse hammering in her ears. How could it be him? He had been in a coma, trapped in that lifeless state. Yet somehow she knew it was him. There was no mistaking the urgency in his voice. He was awake. He was aware. In that moment everything shifted. The fear that had gripped Sophia's chest began to subside, replaced by a surge of determination. Gabriel was still there. He was still fighting. And she wasn't going to let him down now. With the flash drive still in hand, she made her move. She spun around, dodging the advancing guards, and sprinted toward the nearest exit. The sound of Dr. Turner's voice shouting behind her echoed through the night, but Sophia didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The guards were fast, but she had something they didn't: hope. And as she neared the parking lot, she spotted the vehicle she had hidden earlier that night. Her heart leapt as she saw the headlights flash on. She wasn't alone. Jack had called for backup. Someone was out there waiting to help. Sophia reached the car, fumbling for the keys in her pocket. Her hands were shaking, but she managed to get the door open. Without a second thought, she slammed the door shut and threw the car into gear. The tires squealed as she sped away, the sound of sirens growing louder in the distance. But she didn't look back. She couldn't. She had Gabriel's future to save. And now, with the truth in her hands, she had the power to do it. Sophia's pulse raced as she navigated the streets of Redwood City, the lights of the city blurring around her. Her hands were still shaking, but she gripped the wheel tightly, refusing to let go. She had barely escaped the facility with her life, and now there was no turning back. She had to make sure the flash drive reached the right hands, the journalist Jack had contacted. But the road ahead was uncertain. She could feel the weight of the danger pressing down on her. And she knew that Dr. Turner wouldn't stop until she was silenced. As she drove through the quiet streets, her thoughts kept returning to Gabriel. She had been with him for weeks, caring for him, talking to him, but she hadn't known the full extent of his condition. He had been conscious all along, trapped in his own body, unable to communicate, but aware of everything happening around him. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. How long had he been trying to reach out? How many times had he tried to warn her? The flash drive was the key to everything. It contained the evidence they needed to expose Dr. Turner and the conspiracy. If they could get it to the journalist, it would be the end of everything Redwood Care had built. It would bring the corrupt institution to its knees, and Gabriel's voice would finally be heard. But there was no time to waste. She had to act quickly. Sophia glanced at the rearview mirror, her stomach tightening as she noticed the flashing lights of a police car behind her. Panic surged through her, but she forced herself to stay calm. She couldn't afford to make a mistake now. She had come too far. The police car was getting closer, its sirens wailing. Sophia's mind raced as she tried to think of a way out. There was no way she could outrun them, not with the car in its current condition. But she didn't need to outrun them. She just needed to buy time. Her eyes darted to the side, and she spotted an alley up ahead. Without hesitation, she turned the wheel, steering the car into the narrow passage. The car lurched, its tires screeching against the pavement as she sped through the alley, weaving between dumpsters and parked cars. The police car was still following her, but she could hear the officers cursing behind her as they struggled to keep up. Sophia's heart raced as she pushed the car harder, her grip tightening on the wheel. She had to lose them. She had to get away. At the end of the alley, she spotted a small road that led into a residential neighborhood. She turned sharply, taking the corner so quickly that the tires squealed in protest. The police car had fallen behind, and for a brief moment Sophia allowed herself to breathe. But she knew this wouldn't last. They would be back. And when they did, they would be bringing more than just the police. She had to act fast. She spotted a parking garage ahead and steered the car toward it. She needed to lose the tail and get to the journalist before it was too late. As the car disappeared into the shadows of the garage, Sophia knew she was running out of time. The game was only just beginning, and the real battle was about to start. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest as she navigated through the maze of the parking garage, the dull hum of the engine filling the tense silence inside the car. The faint sound of police sirens echoed from the streets above, but for the moment she was safe, hidden in the shadows. She parked the car near a back corner, far from the security cameras, and turned off the engine. For a moment all she could do was breathe, her chest rising and falling in shaky bursts. She had done it. She had outrun them. But the relief was fleeting. Dr. Turner wouldn't give up that easily. She could feel it in her bones. He had resources, connections that extended far beyond Redwood Care's walls. His reach was vast, and his influence seemed endless. She had no doubt that he would send every available officer after her, every private investigator, every agent he could find, and they would stop at nothing to bring her down. She clutched the flash drive tightly, the small piece of evidence that held the key to exposing the entire conspiracy. It was all she had left now. Gabriel was counting on her. She couldn't let him down. As she sat there, her mind racing, the reality of what she had done started to sink in. She had taken Gabriel from that hospital, pulled him out of the coma-like state he had been trapped in for so long. But what was she going to do now? Where could they go? The world outside felt like a minefield, full of dangers she wasn't prepared for. Every corner, every street could be watched. She had no idea who she could trust. Her only option was to keep moving, to keep going. The truth had to come out. For Gabriel. For Jack. For all the people who had been hurt by Dr. Turner's lies. Sophia took a deep breath and reached for her phone. She scrolled through her contacts and found Jack's name. His message from earlier had been clear. He would be waiting for her at the rendezvous point, ready to help. It was time to make her move. With one final glance in the rearview mirror to make sure no one had followed her into the garage, Sophia put the car in reverse and slowly backed out. She was moving cautiously now, aware that even the smallest mistake could cost her everything. She had to make it to the journalist who would expose the truth. If they were lucky, the world would know about Dr. Turner's corruption before he could silence them all. As she exited the parking garage, her eyes scanned the streets for any signs of danger. There were no flashing lights, no cars tailing her. But the unease in her stomach refused to go away. She was playing a dangerous game, and there was no telling how it would end. Minutes later, she arrived at the meeting spot, an old, nondescript diner at the edge of town. She parked the car a few blocks away, not wanting to attract attention. Jack was waiting for her inside, just as he had promised. Sophia pushed open the door and stepped into the dimly lit diner. She spotted Jack sitting in the corner booth, his face serious. When he saw her, he stood up and gave her a brief nod of acknowledgement. No time for pleasantries. They both knew what was at stake. Without a word, Sophia slid into the booth across from him and handed over the flash drive. Jack looked at it, then at her, his eyes full of unspoken questions. "Is it really true?" he asked quietly. "Is everything on here?" Sophia nodded, her voice low but steady. "It's all there. Dr. Turner and his team have been manipulating Gabriel's recovery for years. They've been keeping him sedated to control his company, his assets. This is the proof we need to expose them." Jack's jaw tightened as he glanced at the flash drive. "This could bring everything down," he said. "But it's going to be dangerous. You don't know what they're capable of. You don't know how far they'll go to stop this." "I know," Sophia replied, her voice barely a whisper. "But I have to do this. I can't let them keep hurting people. I can't let them keep Gabriel locked in that state, unable to speak for himself." Jack studied her for a moment, his expression softening. "You're right. We have to expose them. We can't let them get away with this." He looked down at the flash drive again, his fingers tracing the edges as if weighing the enormity of what they were about to do. "I'll get this to the right people," he said finally. "But you're not safe here. Not anymore. You've got to lay low for a while." Sophia hesitated, the weight of his words sinking in. He was right. Dr. Turner would be looking for her, and he would stop at nothing to find her and retrieve the evidence. She had no choice but to disappear, to go underground until the story broke. But what about Gabriel? She couldn't leave him behind, not now that he was awake and aware. She had to make sure he was safe. "I can't just run," she said. "I need to make sure Gabriel's all right. I can't leave him. He's been through so much and I know," Jack interrupted gently. "I'll help you. We'll figure out how to get to him. But for now you need to stay off the radar. We can't afford to have you caught." Sophia nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of the choices ahead. She had never been a fighter, not in the way Jack and others were. But she had never felt more resolute in her life. This was about more than just survival. It was about justice. It was about Gabriel's future. She couldn't back down now. The hours seemed to stretch into eternity as Sophia waited anxiously in the small motel room Jack had secured for her. The place was quiet, far away from the bustling streets and prying eyes. But every minute felt like a lifetime. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards made her jump, fearing it was Dr. Turner's men closing in. She had never felt more vulnerable. Jack had promised to get the flash drive to the journalist who could break the story. It was risky. He had warned her that even the smallest misstep could ruin everything. But they didn't have any other choice. It was the only way to ensure that Dr. Turner's scheme would be exposed to the world. Sophia sat on the bed, her mind racing as she thought about Gabriel. She could only imagine what he was going through. He had been trapped in that hospital for so long, unable to speak, unable to move, a prisoner in his own body. Now at least he was awake. But what if Dr. Turner found him? What if he tried to silence him again? Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from Jack. "I've got them. I'm sending it to the right people. The story will break tomorrow. We have to be ready. Stay hidden until then. You're safe for now." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. It was happening. The story was going public. But would it be enough? Would the truth be enough to take down Dr. Turner and his network of corruption? She stood up, pacing the room, her hands shaking as she thought about everything that had led to this moment. The evidence was irrefutable, but Sophia knew all too well how powerful Dr. Turner was. If he wanted to silence them, he would do whatever it took. She had to trust that the people who had received the flash drive, journalists, investigators, those who were committed to exposing the truth, would do their part. They had to. The weight of the world felt like it was pressing down on her shoulders, but in the pit of her stomach, she felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to think that maybe, just maybe, they could win. The truth had a way of coming to light, even in the darkest places. And soon the world would know what Dr. Turner had done. The hours that followed were a blur of tense conversations and carefully executed plans. Sophia sat in the dingy motel room, barely blinking as she reviewed every detail from the flash drive, her mind trying to piece together the truth from the scattered documents, the coded messages, and the terrifying evidence of Dr. Turner's manipulations. The sheer scope of it all was overwhelming. How could one man, one institution, carry out such a web of deceit for so long without anyone noticing? The idea of Dr. Turner being behind all of it, Gabriel's extended coma, the falsified medical records, the patient mistreatment, made her sick. She rubbed her temples as the weight of the situation pressed down on her. There was no going back now. She had crossed a line, and there was no safe place for her anymore. But there was still Gabriel. She couldn't abandon him. He had trusted her to uncover the truth, and no matter how much danger it put her in, she had to see this through. Sophia reached for her phone, dialing Jack's number with trembling hands. He had been working tirelessly, liaising with the journalists, making sure the flash drive was in the right hands, that everything would come together in the perfect storm. The phone rang 3 times before Jack's voice came through, gruff but steady. "Sophia." "Jack, is everything ready?" she asked, her voice shaking despite her attempts at composure. "The pieces are falling into place," Jack replied. "I've spoken to a few trusted sources. This story is going to hit hard. The public's going to know what Turner's been up to. We'll have eyes on the entire Redwood care system, and they won't be able to escape scrutiny. The board members, the doctors, the investors, they're all going down with him." A mixture of relief and fear washed over Sophia. She wanted to believe it. But the consequences of this revelation could be catastrophic, not just for Dr. Turner, but for anyone caught in his wake. And Gabriel? How do we make sure he's safe once this all comes out? Jack's tone softened. I've got contacts at a secure facility. As soon as the story breaks, I'll move him. He'll be safe. But you need to lay low for a while. You've done the hard part. I'll handle the rest. Sophia's mind flashed back to Gabriel's face. His eyes that had once been lifeless now filled with a spark of awareness. She couldn't leave him to face the aftermath of this alone. I can't just disappear, Jack. I can't leave him. I know. But you're the key to this. If you get caught now, the whole thing falls apart. Turner will stop at nothing to get you. Let me take care of the next step. You'll see Gabriel again, but for now you have to trust me. Sophia closed her eyes, the weight of his words sinking in. Felt wrong to leave him alone. But she knew Jack was right. The clock was ticking. The world had to know what Dr. Turner had done. For Gabriel. For all of them. I trust you, she whispered. Do whatever it takes. After hanging up, Sophia spent the next few hours in a state of restless anticipation. She kept the room's lights dimmed, the door locked, constantly watching the news, hoping for the first signs of the story breaking. The tension was unbearable. Every time a car passed by, she felt her pulse spike, wondering if it was someone coming for her. At last, her phone lit up, signaling a message from Jack. It's time. Sophia's hands trembled as she clicked on the notification. It was a link to a news article. The headline flashed across the screen. Exclusive Redwood Care CEO Dr. Turner accused of corruption, fraud, and patient manipulation, investigation underway. Her breath caught in her throat as she read through the article, details of Dr. Turner's twisted operation, the falsified patient records, the mistreatment of the most vulnerable. Gabriel's name was in there, along with mentions of others who had been sedated, their lives stolen away. The truth was finally out. And it was just the beginning. The days that followed felt like a whirlwind of chaos. News outlets picked up the story, with journalists and investigators digging deeper into the corruption at Redwood Care. Every moment brought more revelations, more whistleblowers coming forward, exposing the dark heart of the institution that had been built on lies and manipulation. Dr. Turner's empire was crumbling. Arrests were made. His associates turned on him. And the public outcry was deafening. But for Sophia, the hardest part was the waiting. She kept her head down, hiding in plain sight, knowing that any wrong move could get her caught. Jack had kept his promise, and Gabriel was moved to a secure facility. But she couldn't rest. The fight wasn't over. Dr. Turner was still out there, still a threat. And until he was behind bars, Sophia couldn't allow herself to feel safe. Then one evening a call came through. It was Jack. Sophia, he said, his voice filled with urgency. It's done. They've arrested Turner. He's in custody. Relief flooded through her, though it was tempered by the awareness that their journey wasn't finished. The legal battles would be long and complicated, but the truth had prevailed. The man who had once controlled so many lives, including Gabriel's, was finally being held accountable. But there was more good news. Sophia didn't have to ask. Jack could hear the question in her voice. Gabriel's stable, he continued. He's improving. Slowly. But he's awake and he's aware. He's fighting to get better, just like you did. Sophia's heart swelled with emotion. She had always hoped that Gabriel would find his strength again, that he would have a chance at a future. And now it seemed that chance had arrived. 2 weeks later, Sophia stood outside the gates of the new facility where Gabriel was staying, her hands trembling as she clutched the small bouquet of flowers she had picked from the garden. The sky was clear, the sun warm on her face, and for the first time in a long while she felt a sense of peace. When she entered the room, Gabriel was sitting up in bed, looking out the window. He turned toward her as she entered, his eyes still hazy from the aftermath of the coma, but there was something there, something she had never seen before. A glimmer of recognition. Gabriel, she said softly, her voice trembling. It's me, Sophia. He smiled. It wasn't a full smile, but it was enough. His eyes spoke the words his lips could not yet form. Sophia walked to his side, taking his hand in hers. She could feel the warmth of his skin, the faint tremor in his grip. You're going to be okay, she whispered, the words more for herself than for him. We're going to get through this together. Gabriel's gaze softened, and though he couldn't speak, she saw the gratitude in his eyes. They had been through so much, So many battles, so many moments of doubt, but they had made it. They had fought for the truth and now they could rebuild. As she sat there beside him, the future seemed brighter than it ever had before. There was still much to be done, legal battles, healing and rebuilding trust, but for now there was peace. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Sophia allowed herself to believe in a future that was hers to shape. The fight for justice had not only saved Gabriel's life, it had given them both a second chance. And this time they would make sure the truth would never be hidden again. Throughout their perilous journey, Sophia and Gabriel learned that sometimes, a single brave action, a single right choice, can change the course of a life. They fought not only to bring the truth to light but also to reclaim their right to live, to be free, and to be loved. Though Dr. Turner and his accomplices were brought to justice, life was not without its challenges. Gabriel and Sophia both knew the road ahead would not be easy, but they were no longer alone. They had each other, and that was the greatest strength of all. When one no longer has to fight alone, they can create remarkable change. As each day passed, Gabriel began to heal. Not just physically but mentally. He was returning to life, albeit slowly, but with a newfound determination, a burning desire to never let his past define his future. Sophia, too, had not only saved Gabriel, but she had rediscovered her own purpose. She knew that justice had been served, but what she had truly been searching for was peace within her heart. And she found it when she held Gabriel's hand, knowing they would build a future they both deserved. And in the light of a new dawn, Sophia and Gabriel understood that no matter how long the truth is hidden in darkness, it will always come to light. They had won because they never gave up, because they believed that a truthful and resilient heart can overcome any obstacle. Together they walked forward, ready for whatever life might bring, but never forgetting that no matter how tough life may get, it will always offer new opportunities, as long as we don't give up. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the full story. We truly appreciate your support, and hope you enjoyed the journey alongside Sophia and Gabriel. If you liked the story, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and consider subscribing to stay updated on more exciting stories like this. Your feedback means the world to us and helps us create even better content in the future. Don't forget to hit the notification bell, so you never miss an update. Thanks again for being a part of this, and we look forward to bringing you more stories soon.